Revenge with Marvella. The funeral was on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of day where the sky seemed to press down on everything like a heavy blanket. I stood at the entrance to St. Michael's Church, wearing the black dress my husband Thomas had always said made me look elegant. People streamed past me, offering brief condolences before hurrying inside to escape the cold drizzle. I'd been married to Thomas for 8 years, a late-life marriage, as his family never tired of reminding me. I was 52 when we met, 53 when we married, and now at 60, I was a widow. I walked toward the front of the church where the family was supposed to sit. Thomas's sister, Patricia, stood in the aisle like a guard at a gate. She was 10 years younger than me, dressed in expensive black wool, her face carefully composed into an expression of grief that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Excuse me," I said quietly, trying to move past her to the front pew where I belonged. Patricia didn't move. Instead, she placed one manicured hand on my arm. "Actually, Diane, the immediate family is sitting in front. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable further back." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "I am immediate family. I was his wife." Patricia's smile was thin and cold. She leaned closer and whispered, so only I could hear, "You were his wife for 8 years. We've been his family for 64. You don't really belong here anymore." Before I could respond, she turned away and took her seat in the front pew next to her mother and brother. I stood frozen in the aisle while people filed past me, their eyes averted. Something was very wrong. This wasn't just grief talking. This was deliberate. I sat in the third row, alone, and watched them bury my husband. The reception was held at Thomas's mother's estate, a sprawling property in the suburbs that had been in the family for 3 generations. I'd only been there a handful of times during my marriage. Thomas preferred to keep our life separate from his family's constant drama. Now I understood why. I was standing by the window, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, when a man in a gray suit approached me. He wasn't dressed for a funeral. He looked official, almost clinical. "Diane Morrison?" he asked. "Yes." He pulled an envelope from his briefcase and held it out. "You've been served." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Around me, conversations continued, but I felt like I was underwater, everything muffled and distant. I tore open the envelope and pulled out the legal documents inside. "Emergency petition for estate administration," the header read. I scanned the text, my eyes catching on phrases that made my stomach turn: undue influence over the deceased, questionable circumstances surrounding financial decisions, removal of current executor, emergency guardianship of estate assets. Thomas's family had filed a lawsuit against me. They were claiming I'd manipulated Thomas before his death, that I'd pressured him into changing his will, that I was unfit to manage his estate or make any decisions regarding his assets. The hearing was scheduled for 4 weeks from today. I looked up and saw Patricia watching me from across the room. She raised her wine glass slightly in a mock toast, then turned back to her conversation. I folded the papers carefully and put them back in the envelope. My hands had stopped shaking. Whatever they thought they were doing, they'd just made a terrible mistake. The rumors started within days. I heard them through mutual friends, through neighbors, through people who'd known Thomas and me as a couple. The story his family was spreading was consistent and devastating. According to them, I was just a nurse who'd been working at the hospital where Thomas was treated for a minor surgery. I'd pursued him deliberately, targeting a wealthy widower. I'd married above my station and spent the entire marriage trying to isolate Thomas from his family. They painted me as calculating, manipulative, and now that Thomas was gone, desperate to claim everything before the family could stop me. Patricia gave an interview to the local society page, disguised as a tribute to Thomas, where she mentioned his unfortunate late-life marriage to someone outside our usual circles. Thomas's mother, Eleanor, told everyone at her book club that I'd been just a caretaker, really, not a true partner. The worst part was how many people believed it. I'd watch their faces change when they saw me at the grocery store or the post office. Sympathy would flicker and die, replaced by suspicion or pity. What they didn't know, what Thomas's family had apparently never bothered to learn, was that I hadn't been just a nurse. But I'd stopped correcting people years ago when Thomas and I decided that my previous career was better left in the past. Then Patricia's sworn affidavit arrived in the mail. It was 5 pages of carefully constructed lies. She claimed I'd prevented Thomas from seeing his family, that I'd controlled his medications, that I'd pressured him to sign new financial documents while he was clearly not of sound mind. None of it was true, but it was detailed and convincing. They were building a case to erase me completely. The practical erasure began subtly, then accelerated. On Monday morning, I went to the bank to access our joint account, the one Thomas and I had used for household expenses. The account I deposited my paycheck into for 8 years. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison," the bank manager said, her face sympathetic but firm. "This account has been frozen pending legal review. I can't give you access." Frozen? By whom? She glanced at her computer screen. "It appears the freeze was requested by the estate's co-beneficiaries. You'll need to resolve this through the courts." I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. That's my money. I need to buy groceries. I need to pay bills. I understand, and I'm very sorry. But my hands are tied until the legal matter is resolved. I left the bank with $17 in my wallet. The next day, I received a notice that my name had been removed from the deed to our house, the house Thomas and I had bought together 5 years ago. According to the notice, I was no longer a legal owner and would need to make alternate living arrangements within 60 days. On Wednesday, my car insurance was canceled. Not suspended, canceled entirely. When I called the company, they told me the cancellation had been requested and authorized by the account holder, Thomas Morrison. "That's impossible," I said. "Thomas has been dead for 2 weeks. The representative paused. "According to our records, the cancellation request came through last Friday with proper authorization." I hung up and stared at the cancellation notice. Someone had forged Thomas's signature. Someone had access to his accounts, his documents, his identity. They weren't just trying to erase me legally. They were trying to erase me from existence, one document at a time. I confronted Thomas's brother, William, at his downtown law office. He agreed to see me, which should have been my first warning that this wasn't going to go well. William was 58, a corporate attorney with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. He sat behind his massive desk like a king on a throne and gestured for me to sit in the chair across from him, the one positioned slightly lower than his, I noticed. "Diane, I'm glad you came," he said, his tone suggesting he was anything but glad. "We need to have a frank conversation about your situation." "My situation?" I kept my voice level. "You mean the situation where your family is systematically destroying my life?" He sighed like I was a child having a tantrum. "We're protecting Thomas's legacy. Surely you can understand that. By freezing my bank accounts? By forging documents? By spreading lies about me?" William leaned back in his chair and studied me with cold eyes. "You need to understand something, Diane. You don't have the standing to fight this. You don't have the resources, you don't have the connections, and frankly, you don't have the rank to challenge this family." I stared at him. Rank? Yes, rank. Social standing, professional credentials, family legacy, all the things that matter in these situations. You were a nurse. A good one, I'm sure, but just a nurse. You married into a family that's been influential in this city for generations. Did you really think we'd just let you walk away with everything Thomas built? He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "I'm advising you, as a courtesy, to accept whatever settlement we offer. Sign the papers, take the money, and move on with your life. Because if you fight us, you'll lose everything." I stood slowly and picked up my purse. "Thank you for your time, William." As I walked to the door, he called after me, "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." I didn't turn around. I didn't trust myself to speak. William had no idea how wrong he was about my rank. And I intended to keep it that way. That evening, I went down to the basement of our house, my house, regardless of what the documents said. In the far corner, behind boxes of holiday decorations and old furniture, was a small safe built into the concrete wall. Thomas had insisted I keep it. Just in case, he'd said. Just in case they try something. I'd asked him what he meant, and he'd just kissed my forehead and said his family had a history of being difficult about inheritances. I hadn't realized he meant they had a history of erasing people. I spun the combination lock, our wedding date, and pulled the heavy door open. Inside were several sealed envelopes, all labeled in Thomas's neat handwriting. One said, financial records. Another said, original will. A third said, life insurance. At the bottom was a flat box, and on it Thomas had written, in case they try. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were documents, some old and yellowed, others more recent. There were letters from Thomas to his lawyer, emails he'd printed out, and a handwritten note addressed to me. Diane, if you're reading this, it means my family is doing exactly what I feared. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them make you feel small. You are not what they say you are. The document at the bottom of this box is sealed by court order. Use it only if you must. They have no idea who you really are. I love you. Make them remember you. Thomas. At the bottom of the box, in a sealed envelope with official stamps and ribbons, was a document I hadn't looked at in over 20 years. It referenced my professional rank, the one I'd held before I retired and became just a nurse. The rank that, if verified, would change everything. I made a decision that night. I would stop fighting them, at least publicly. I would let them think they'd won, that they'd overwhelmed me, that I was exactly what they believed I was, a scared, powerless widow with no options. When Patricia called to check on me the next day, her voice dripping with false concern, I played my part perfectly. I don't know what to do, I said, letting my voice shake. I can't access my money. The lawyer said I might lose the house. I don't understand any of this legal language. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Oh, Diane, I'm so sorry you're going through this. It's just so complicated, isn't it? Maybe it would be easier if you just accepted our settlement offer. We're not trying to leave you with nothing. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. I just want this to be over. Of course you do. I'll have William send over the papers. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and began documenting everything. Every phone call, every canceled account, every threatening letter. I created a timeline of events, cross-referenced with bank statements and emails. I scanned every document, backed up everything to 3 separate cloud storage accounts. While they relaxed, thinking I'd given up, I was building a case that would bury them. I'd learned patience from my years in my previous career. I'd learned that sometimes the best strategy was to let your opponent think they'd already won. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late. My research into Thomas's family revealed something disturbing. This wasn't the first time they'd done this to someone. 23 years ago, Thomas's uncle Harold had married a woman named Claire. She was younger, from a working-class background, and the family had disapproved. Harold died 5 years later in a car accident, and Claire had filed for her share of the estate. The family fought her in court. It dragged on for 2 years, during which time Claire lost her job, her apartment, and eventually her health. The case was finally settled, with Claire receiving a small fraction of what she was entitled to. She signed the settlement papers and disappeared. I found her obituary from 3 years later. She died alone in a nursing home in another state. Cause of death, complications from stress-related illness. She was 46. The pattern was clear. The family targeted outsiders, spouses they considered beneath them. They used their money and connections to overwhelm and isolate them. They fought dirty, using legal tactics designed to exhaust their opponent's resources and will to fight. And when they won, the person they'd targeted simply disappeared from the story. I was supposed to be next. But there was one critical difference between Claire and me. I knew how to fight people like this. I'd spent 25 years of my career doing exactly that. The family had made their calculations based on who they thought I was. They had no idea who I actually was. I decided to visit Claire's grave. She was buried in a small cemetery an hour outside the city. I stood in front of her headstone, a simple marker that didn't mention her marriage to Harold or her connection to the family, and made her a promise. They won't erase me, I said quietly. And when I'm done, people will remember what they did to you too. Patricia called a family meeting 2 weeks before the court hearing. She asked me to come to Eleanor's house to discuss settlement terms in a civilized manner. I knew it was a trap, but I went anyway. I wore my simplest clothes and brought a purse large enough to hide my phone, which I'd set to record audio. Eleanor's living room was exactly as I remembered: expensive furniture, fresh flowers, and family photos that had never included me. Patricia, William, and Eleanor sat together on one side of the room. I sat alone on the other side. "Diane, we've asked you here because we care about you," Patricia began, her voice syrupy. "We don't want this to get ugly in court." "Neither do I said quietly. William leaned forward. "Good. Then you'll accept our offer. We're prepared to give you $50,000 and allow you to stay in the house for 6 months rent-free while you find somewhere else to live." I did the math in my head. Thomas's estate was worth at least $8 million, probably more. They were offering me less than 1% of what I was legally entitled to. "That seems very low," I said carefully. Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice cold. "You were married to my son for 8 years. We've been his family for his entire life. You should be grateful we're offering you anything at all." Thomas wanted me to have. Thomas was not in his right mind when he changed his will, Patricia interrupted. We all saw it. He was confused, forgetful. You took advantage of that confusion. That's not true. William stood up, and his voice took on a harder edge. Here's what's true, Diane. You have no money, no legal representation, and no standing in this community. We have all three. If you fight us, we will destroy you. We'll make sure you can't get a job in this city. We'll tie you up in court for years until you're bankrupt and broken. Patricia nodded. We've done this before. We know how it ends. The room went silent. Eleanor looked at Patricia sharply, and William closed his eyes briefly. They'd just admitted their pattern, their strategy, their guilt, and they'd done it while I was recording every word. I stood up slowly. I need time to think about your offer. You have until Friday, William said. After that, the offer is off the table. I walked out of that house knowing I had everything I needed. Their lawyer, a man named Harrison Brooks from a prestigious downtown firm, began filing motions designed to overwhelm me. Every few days, a new legal document would arrive: requests for financial disclosure, demands for depositions, motions to compel discovery. Each one had a deadline, usually unreasonably short. Each one required a response, or I would lose by default. It was a standard intimidation tactic. They expected me to miss deadlines, to fail to respond properly, to make mistakes that would weaken my case. They expected me to be so overwhelmed that I'd give up and accept their settlement. But I didn't miss a single deadline. I responded to every motion, filed every required document, met every impossible timeline. I did it myself, without a lawyer, using the legal knowledge I'd acquired during my previous career. My responses were simple, factual, and precise. I didn't argue or get emotional. I just provided exactly what was required by law, nothing more and nothing less. I could imagine Harrison Brooks's confusion as my responses came in, one after another, perfectly formatted and filed exactly on time. This wasn't how just a nurse was supposed to behave. After the 7th motion, the filing slowed down. They were starting to realize something was wrong with their calculations. But they didn't know what. And I wasn't about to tell them. Instead of filing public motions or making dramatic legal moves, I did something quieter and far more dangerous for them. I requested sealed verification from an external authority regarding my professional credentials, specifically my rank and service record from my previous career. This required going through official channels that most people didn't even know existed. I filled out forms, provided identification, and requested that the verification be delivered directly to the court handling Thomas's estate case. The request specified that the confirmation would require in-person court acknowledgement. This was standard procedure for certain types of classified or protected service records. I didn't tell anyone I'd done this. I didn't mention it to Patricia's lawyers. I simply filed the request through the proper channels and waited. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that the verification had been processed and would be presented to the court at the scheduled hearing. The notice also indicated that once presented, the verification would become part of the official court record and could not be sealed again without a federal court order. Whatever happened in that courtroom, the truth about who I was and what I'd done would finally come out. Thomas's family was building their entire case on the assumption that I was nobody important. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong that assumption was. The court ordered mediation before the full hearing, a last attempt to settle the matter without a trial. We met in a conference room at the courthouse, with a professional mediator named Alan Chen presiding. I arrived alone, carrying a single folder. Patricia, William, Eleanor, and Harrison Brooks arrived with 3 lawyers, 2 paralegals, and enough briefcases to stock a law library. The mediator reviewed the case summary, then looked at me with something like pity. "Mrs. Morrison, I understand you're representing yourself?" "Yes. You're aware that you're at a significant disadvantage against represented parties?" "I'm aware." Eleanor made a small snorting sound. William smirked. They thought this was already over. We went through the preliminaries, the estate value, the disputed assets, the family's claims about Thomas's mental state. Harrison Brooks presented their case smoothly, making me sound like a predator who'd targeted a vulnerable widower. When it was my turn to respond, I kept it simple. Everything Mr. Brooks said is untrue. I have documentation to support my position, which I'll present at the hearing. Eleanor leaned forward. Documentation? What documentation could you possibly have? Before I could answer, William interrupted. This is pointless. She's wasting everyone's time. He turned to the mediator. Sir, with all due respect, she's nobody important. She has no legal standing, no credentials, no authority to challenge this family's claim. She was a nurse who got lucky and married money. That's all. The mediator looked at William for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Then he looked down at the file in front of him, the file that had just been updated with my verification request. His expression changed. It was subtle, just a slight widening of the eyes, but I saw it. I think, the mediator said slowly, that we should proceed to a full hearing. There are some matters that need to be addressed in front of a judge. Patricia frowned. What matters? This is simple. Nevertheless, the mediator said firmly, I'm scheduling a full hearing. 2 weeks from today. As we left the conference room, I saw Harrison Brooks pull the mediator aside and speak to him urgently. The mediator shook his head and walked away. Something had changed. They didn't know what yet, but they could feel it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and reviewed the sealed document in full for the first time in 20 years. Before I became just a nurse, I had been Major Diane Catherine Morrison, United States Army, assigned to the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the military's legal division. I had spent 25 years as a military lawyer, specializing in complex fraud cases, international law, and court-martial proceedings. I had prosecuted generals, defended soldiers accused of war crimes, and advised commanders on legal strategy in combat zones. My final rank was 05, a lieutenant colonel in the Army's legal corps. I had security clearances that most civilians didn't know existed. I had argued cases in military courts that made civilian litigation look like traffic violations. I had retired at 50, burned out and tired of the constant stress. I'd taken a job as a hospital nurse because I wanted to help people directly, simply, without the weight of life and death legal decisions. It had been peaceful. Healing. When I met Thomas, I'd been honest about my past, but we'd agreed not to advertise it. He understood that I wanted a quiet life, away from the intensity of my military career. His family had never asked about my background. They'd seen nurse on my employment records and assumed that was all I'd ever been. The sealed document in front of me contained my full service record, my commendations, my rank progression, and my security clearances. It also contained a notation that my record was protected under federal law and could only be released with my permission or by court order. I had given my permission. The document would be presented to the judge in 2 weeks. Thomas's family had built their entire legal strategy on the assumption that they outranked me in every way that mattered, socially, financially, professionally. They were about to learn that in any courtroom, under any legal standard, I outranked all of them combined. The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning in early November. I woke up at 5, too nervous to sleep. I dressed carefully in a simple navy suit and pulled my gray hair back in a neat bun. I drove to the courthouse alone and sat in my car for 10 minutes, gathering my courage. This was it. Everything I'd planned, everything I'd prepared, would either work or fail in the next few hours. I walked into the courtroom at 8:30. It was a large room with wood paneling and high windows. The judge's bench dominated the front, with tables for the parties on either side. I sat at the respondent's table on the left side, alone. At 8:45, Thomas's family arrived. They came in like a parade, Eleanor in an expensive black suit, Patricia in designer everything, William looking confident and powerful. Harrison Brooks and his legal team followed, carrying boxes of files. They sat at the petitioner's table on the right side. I watched them whisper to each other, watched Patricia point at me and smile, watched William lean back in his chair like he owned the room. At 8:55, the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Martin Anderson." The judge entered, a man in his mid-60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He sat down, arranged his papers, and looked out at both tables. "Please be seated," he said. "We're here today regarding the estate of Thomas Harold Morrison, deceased. The petitioners are Eleanor Morrison, Patricia Morrison Hayes, and William Morrison, who are challenging the current executor designation. Is everyone present?" Harrison Brooks stood. "Yes, Your Honor. All petitioners are present and represented." The judge looked at my table. "Mrs. Diane Morrison, I see you're representing yourself. Is that correct?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor." He studied me for a moment, then asked the question that changed everything. "Mrs. Morrison, before we proceed, I need to confirm something in your file. Did you serve in the United States military?" The courtroom went very quiet. "Yes, Your Honor." "I did." The judge looked down at the file in front of him, then up at the court clerk. "I'm going to need verification of the sealed credentials that were submitted to this court last week. Can you confirm receipt?" The clerk, a young woman with nervous hands, flipped through her files. She found what she was looking for and froze. Her face went pale. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "the verification is here. It requires special handling." "I'm aware," the judge said. "Please bring it forward." The clerk stood up and carried a sealed envelope to the judge's bench. Her hands were shaking slightly. I noticed Harrison Brooks lean forward, trying to see what was happening. The judge opened the envelope and pulled out the documents inside. He read them carefully, his expression neutral. Then he read them again. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for the sound of papers rustling. Finally, the judge looked up at me. "Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, is that your current rank?" I heard gasps from the petitioner's table. Patricia's face had drained of all color. William was staring at me like I was a stranger. "Retired Lieutenant Colonel, Your Honor," I said clearly. "I served in the JAG Corps for 25 years before retiring at the rank of 05. The judge nodded slowly. "And during your service, you specialized in military law, Your Honor. Fraud prosecution, court-martial defense, and international legal affairs." Eleanor made a choking sound. Harrison Brooks had gone very still, his face frozen. The judge set down the papers and looked at the petitioner's table. "Mr. Brooks, did you know about your opposing party's credentials when you filed this case?" Harrison stood slowly. "No, Your Honor. We were not aware. You filed a case challenging the competence and credibility of a retired military legal officer without doing basic background research? Your Honor, if I could request a brief recess too." The judge held up one hand. "Request denied. We're going to proceed." Judge Anderson read through the files again, taking his time. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, oppressive. I could feel Patricia staring at me, could sense William's shock, could practically hear Eleanor's mind racing. Finally, the judge looked up. "I'm going to pause these proceedings. Something about this case doesn't add up." He turned to Harrison Brooks. "Mr. Brooks, approach the bench. Bring your lead petitioner." William stood and walked forward with Harrison. They stood in front of the judge's bench while he spoke to them in a low voice. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I watched William's expression change from confident to confused to alarmed. Harrison was shaking his head, pointing back at his files, trying to explain something. The judge wasn't having it. After 5 minutes, they returned to their table. William's face was bright red. Harrison looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The judge addressed the courtroom. We're going to take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I expect Mr. Brooks to have consulted with his clients about the implications of proceeding with this case. The bailiff called for everyone to rise as the judge left the courtroom. The moment he was gone, chaos erupted at the petitioner's table. Patricia grabbed William's arm, demanding to know what was happening. Eleanor was speaking rapidly to Harrison, who kept shaking his head. The other lawyers were frantically looking through their files. I sat quietly at my table, hands folded, waiting. William suddenly turned and stared at me across the courtroom. "You lied to us," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You let us think you were just a nurse." I met his eyes calmly. I was a nurse. I'm also a retired lieutenant colonel with a law degree and 25 years of courtroom experience. You never asked. Patricia stood up. "This is a trick. This is some kind of—" "It's not a trick," Harrison Brooks said quietly, looking at his papers. "It's all verified. She was JAG Corps. She's got credentials that—" He trailed off, looking sick. Eleanor's voice was ice. "What does this mean for our case?" Harrison didn't answer. He didn't have to. We all knew what it meant. When court resumed, Harrison Brooks stood immediately. "Your Honor, in light of new information that has come to our attention, the petitioners would like to request a recess to reconsider our position and potentially refile with amended." "No," Judge Anderson said flatly. "You've had ample time to do your due diligence before filing this case. You made serious allegations against Mrs. Morrison's character and competence. We're going to address those allegations now, with the benefit of full disclosure about who she actually is." Harrison sat down heavily. He looked at William and shook his head slightly, a lawyer's signal that things were about to get very bad. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Morrison, do you have evidence you'd like to submit regarding the petitioner's claims?" I stood and picked up my folder. "Yes, Your Honor. I have several items." I approached the bench and handed the judge a USB drive. "This contains an audio recording of a meeting held at Eleanor Morrison's residence 2 weeks ago. In it, the petitioners discuss their strategy for this case, including their admission that they've used similar tactics in the past to, quote, erase family members they deemed unworthy." Patricia gasped. Eleanor went rigid in her chair. "I also have documentation showing that multiple financial accounts were frozen using forged authorization, that my car insurance was canceled using a forged signature from my deceased husband, and that the petitioners have been systematically attempting to remove my access to assets I'm legally entitled to." I returned to my table and pulled out more documents. I have the original will, properly witnessed and notarized, showing my husband's clear wishes. I have financial records proving that I contributed to our marital assets. And I have testimony from Thomas's personal physician stating that he was of completely sound mind until the day he died. The judge accepted the documents and began reviewing them. The courtroom was silent except for the rustling of papers. Finally, he looked up at the petitioner's table. "Mr. Brooks, your clients have some explaining to do." Over the next hour, I methodically destroyed their case. I submitted the recording of Patricia admitting they'd planned to erase me. I presented proof of the forged signatures, bank documents showing Thomas's supposed authorization dated 3 days after his death. I showed the pattern of financial manipulation, the canceled accounts, the locked assets. Each piece of evidence landed like a bomb. Patricia started crying halfway through, though I suspected the tears were for herself, not from remorse. Eleanor sat stone-faced, her lips pressed into a thin line. William kept whispering urgently to Harrison, who could only shake his head helplessly. When I presented the evidence about Claire, Thomas's uncle's widow who'd been erased from the family 23 years ago, Eleanor actually stood up. "That's not relevant to this case," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "It's extremely relevant," Judge Anderson said coldly. "It establishes a pattern of behavior." "Sit down, Mrs. Morrison." I finished my presentation and returned to my seat. The judge spent another 15 minutes reviewing the materials, occasionally asking me clarifying questions. His expression grew darker with each page he read. Finally, He set down the papers and looked at the petitioner's table. I'm dismissing this petition entirely. The allegations against Mrs. Morrison are not only unsupported by evidence, they appear to be deliberately fraudulent. Patricia's crying got louder. William put his head in his hands. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm opening a counter-inquiry into possible fraud, elder abuse, and forgery. The evidence suggests that the petitioners engaged in systematic financial manipulation and identity theft. Eleanor tried to interrupt, but the judge held up his hand. I'm not finished, Mrs. Morrison. Be quiet or I'll hold you in contempt. Judge Anderson leaned forward, his voice taking on a harder edge. What I've seen today disturbs me greatly. You didn't just challenge a will or dispute an estate. You attempted to systematically destroy a woman's life based on the assumption that she was powerless to fight back. He gestured to the evidence in front of him. You forged documents. You froze accounts illegally. You spread false statements about her mental competence. You orchestrated a campaign of financial and emotional abuse. Patricia was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. William stared at the table. Eleanor's face was like carved marble. What makes this particularly egregious, the judge continued, is that you did all of this to a woman who spent 25 years serving this country as a military legal officer. A woman who has more courtroom experience than anyone in this room except possibly me. A woman who, frankly, you should have been terrified to cross. He picked up his gavel. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. All assets currently held in the estate of Thomas Morrison will remain under the control of his designated executor, Diane Morrison, as specified in his lawful will. Harrison Brooks started to stand, probably to make some last attempt at damage control, but the judge wasn't done. I'm also issuing an order freezing the personal accounts of Eleanor Morrison, Patricia Morrison Hayes, and William Morrison pending investigation into the forgery and fraud allegations. You will not transfer, hide, or otherwise manipulate any assets until this matter is fully investigated. Eleanor's voice cracked. You can't. I can and I am. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal prosecution. Patricia tried to interrupt, her voice high and panicked. The judge banged his gavel once hard. Ms. Morrison Hayes, if you speak again without being recognized, I will have you removed from this courtroom. She fell silent, tears streaming down her face. The judge turned his attention back to me, and his expression softened slightly. Mrs. Morrison, you've shown considerable restraint in handling this matter. I want you to know that this court recognizes the injustice you've suffered. He paused, consulting his notes. Before I close this hearing, I want to issue a warning to the petitioners. Any further attempt to contact, harass, or interfere with Mrs. Morrison or her assets will result in immediate contempt charges and possible criminal prosecution. Am I making myself clear? William nodded without looking up. Patricia wiped her eyes and nodded. Eleanor sat rigid, saying nothing. Additionally, if this investigation reveals criminal activity, and I suspect it will, you will face the full consequences of your actions. The court takes elder abuse very seriously, and the abuse of a military veteran even more so. The judge looked at me again. Mrs. Morrison, I want to commend you for your service to this country and for your patience in handling this difficult situation. You could have revealed your credentials at any time and ended this quickly, but you chose to build a thorough, legally sound case instead. That speaks to your character and your professionalism. I stood. Thank you, Your Honor. Now, I have one question for you. He leaned forward slightly. What remedy do you seek beyond the dismissal of this petition? These people have caused you significant harm. You're entitled to damages, legal fees, emotional distress compensation. What would you like from this court? The question hung in the air. Everyone waited for my answer. Patricia looked up hopefully, probably thinking I'd ask for money or a settlement, something they could pay and move on from. But that's not what I wanted. Your Honor, I said clearly, I want transparency. The judge raised his eyebrows slightly. Transparency? Can you elaborate? I want the truth about what happened here to be part of the public record, I said. I want the court documents unsealed. I want people to know what this family did, not just to me, but to Claire Anderson 23 years ago. I want it on record so they can't do this to anyone else." Eleanor made a strangled sound. Patricia's crying intensified. "I don't want money from them," I continued. "I have everything Thomas left me, which is all I ever wanted. But I want the community to know who these people really are. I want their actions documented and public." The judge nodded slowly. "I can arrange that. The court records will remain unsealed and available to the public. Is there anything else?" I thought for a moment. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like the court to order the family to fund a scholarship in Claire Anderson's name at the State University. She never got to finish her education because of what they did to her. Someone else should have that opportunity." The judge smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him all day. "I think that's an excellent idea, Mrs. Morrison. I'm ordering the petitioners to establish and fund a scholarship in the amount of $100,000 in Claire Anderson's name to be awarded annually to students from disadvantaged backgrounds pursuing legal studies." William's head snapped up. "Your Honor, that's what?" The judge's voice was sharp. "Fair? Just? A fraction of what you deserve for your actions? You should be grateful Mrs. Morrison is showing more mercy than you showed her." He banged his gavel. "The scholarship will be established within 60 days, or you'll face additional penalties. Are we clear?" William slumped back in his chair. "Yes, Your Honor." Within hours of the judge's ruling, the consequences began to cascade. By that afternoon, all of the Morrison family's assets were frozen pending the criminal investigation. Their bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, everything was locked down. Harrison Brooks filed a motion to withdraw as their legal counsel, citing a breakdown in the attorney-client relationship. In legal terms, it meant he'd discovered they'd lied to him, and he wanted nothing more to do with them. The other lawyers on their team followed suit. By the end of the day, the Morrisons had no legal representation. Patricia called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was desperate and rambling. "Diane, please, we need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. We didn't mean for things to go this far. Can't we work something out? We're family." I deleted the message without responding. William tried next, leaving 3 messages over the course of the evening. The first was angry, threatening legal action, with what lawyers and what money, I wondered. The second was bargaining, offering to drop everything and accept the will as written. The third was pleading, asking me to remember that we were all grieving and people make mistakes. I deleted all 3 messages. At 10 o'clock that night, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw William standing on my porch alone. He looked terrible, disheveled, exhausted, defeated. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Diane, please," he said. "We need to talk privately. Just 5 minutes." "No," I said simply. "You don't understand. The investigation, the frozen accounts, my children's college funds are in those accounts. Patricia's mortgage payment is due. Mother's medical expenses. Should have thought of that before you tried to destroy my life." He ran his hands through his hair. "We were wrong. We admit it. We're sorry. What do you want from us? What will it take to make this stop?" I looked at him for a long moment. This was the man who'd sat in his office and told me I didn't have the rank to fight his family. This was the man who'd helped orchestrate the erasure of Claire Anderson and had been planning to do the same to me. "I want you to live with the consequences of your actions," I said. "Just like you wanted me to live with the consequences of marrying your brother. Good night, William." I closed the door. The next day, Eleanor herself appeared at my door. She was alone, dressed simply for once, without her usual jewelry and expensive accessories. She looked old and tired. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Against my better judgment, I let her inside. We sat in my living room. The room she'd once told Thomas was too modest for a Morrison family member. "I want to apologize," she said, and for once she sounded genuine. "Not for underestimating you, though I did. Not for fighting the will, though I shouldn't have. I want to apologize for being cruel." I said nothing, just waited. "When Thomas married you, I was threatened," she continued. "You were different from us. You didn't care about our social standing or our money. You made Thomas happy in a way his first wife never did. I should have been grateful. Instead, I was jealous." She looked down at her hands. When he died, I saw an opportunity to take back control. To erase you and pretend those 8 years never happened. To have my son back, even if only in memory. You were going to destroy me to preserve a fantasy, I said quietly. Yes. She met my eyes. And I'm not apologizing because the judge forced me to or because my accounts are frozen. I'm apologizing because what I did to you, was unconscionable. You loved my son. You made him happy. And we treated you like you were nothing. She stood to leave. I don't expect you to forgive us. I don't expect you to drop the investigation or unfreeze the accounts or make this easier for us. I just wanted you to know that I'm ashamed of what I did. She walked to the door, then turned back. Thomas would be so proud of you. For how you fought. For how you won. He always said you were stronger than we'd ever understand. After she left, I sat in the quiet house and cried, not for them, but for Thomas, who'd known this would happen and had tried to protect me even after he was gone. The criminal investigation concluded 3 months later. The district attorney decided not to press charges, citing Eleanor's age and the family's agreement to make full restitution for any losses I'd suffered. But the damage to their reputation was permanent. The court records were public, as I'd requested. Local reporters covered the story. The society pages that had once treated the Morrison family as local royalty now ran articles about their attempted fraud and abuse. Patricia's husband divorced her, citing the scandal and her role in it. Williams' law firm asked him to take early retirement. Eleanor resigned from every charitable board she'd sat on, unable to face the questions and whispers. The scholarship in Claire Anderson's name was established and funded. The first recipient was a young woman from a working-class family who wanted to study family law and help abuse victims. All of Thomas's assets were transferred to me without further challenge. The house was legally mine. The accounts were restored. Everything Thomas had wanted me to have, I had. But the best moment came when a reporter from the local newspaper called to ask if I'd be willing to do an interview about the case. Just one question, she said. You stayed silent about your military background for weeks while they attacked you. Why didn't you tell them sooner? Why did you let them think you were helpless? I thought about Claire Anderson, erased from history. I thought about all the other people the family had probably crushed over the years using their money and influence. Because, I said, I wanted them to show everyone exactly who they were. I wanted them to reveal their cruelty and their tactics without any excuse or justification. If I'd told them my rank from the beginning, they could have claimed they were just surprised or overwhelmed. This way, everyone knows the truth. They tried to destroy me because they thought I was powerless, not because I'd done anything wrong. The article ran the next day with the headline, Retired Army Colonel Defeats Elder Abuse Case. Family Didn't Check Her Rank. It went viral. 6 months after the court hearing, I was cleaning out the basement when I found another box of Thomas's things I'd missed. Inside was a letter addressed to me, dated 2 weeks before he died. My dearest Diane. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I suspect my family has shown their true colors. I'm sorry you had to deal with them alone. I wish I could be there to protect you, but I know you don't need my protection. You never did. I've watched you these past 8 years, being content to be seen as just a nurse, when you're so much more than that. I've watched you let people underestimate you, never correcting them, never bragging about your accomplishments. I've loved you for that humility. But I also set up safeguards because I know my family. I know their history. I knew they'd try this. When the time comes, and it will come, don't hold back. Show them who you really are. Make them remember you. You spent 25 years fighting for justice in a courtroom. Don't stop now. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'll be cheering for you from wherever I end up. Yours always, Thomas. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a frame on my desk, next to a photo of us from our wedding day. A week later, I was contacted by a local law school. They'd read about my case and wanted to know if I'd be interested in teaching a course on elder law and legal advocacy. They particularly wanted someone who could teach students how to fight for clients who couldn't fight for themselves. I accepted. Now, twice a week, I stand in front of a classroom of young law students and tell them the truth. The legal system isn't just about knowing the law. It's about patience, strategy, and never letting people see your full hand until you're ready to play it. I tell them about Claire Anderson, whose story would have been forgotten if someone hadn't fought back. I tell them that underestimation can be the most powerful weapon you have if you know how to use it. And I tell them that at 60 years old, Thomas's family tried to erase me from existence. They thought I was just an old woman, powerless and afraid. The judge paused when my rank was confirmed. The family panicked when they realized who I really was. But the most important moment wasn't in the courtroom. It was when I made the choice to fight back, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been erased before me. They thought I was nobody. The judge made sure they never forgot me.